Hi, and thank you for joining us here on Finding Our Way. I'm your host, Darryl Brackeen Jr., and I'll be the moderator for today's debate, the third party congressional district here at Fairfield County. I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel and regulars here on Finding Our Way: Spencer Thibodeau from the class of 2010, Queenie Paniagua from the class of 2009, and then we have the Libertarian candidate, M.A. Carrano, who is run for the first time, I believe, here in the 4th District. And then we have Richard Duffee, who is the candidate for the Green Party. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope to have a great debate here tonight. So let's get started. We can start with Spencer Thibodeau, class of 2010. Give us the first question for both our candidates.
All right, well, the first question that I have for both of you, and I'll direct this to Richard first. As Venezuela becomes more hostile to the United States, how do you believe we should react, and how should we deal with the relationship building between Venezuela and Russia?
Well, I don't think that the building relationship between Venezuela and Russia should be any of our concern at all. We do not have rights over other countries. We should be obeying international law. We should stop interfering with the internal politics of Venezuela. We should not have tried to overthrow Chavez in the first place. We should shut down the covert activities of the CIA, all of which are illegal. We should stop trying to tell other countries what to do and start behaving like a normal country. After all, we did write the UN Charter. We did initially create most of the international law that exists, and we are completely hypocritical now to act as if international law doesn't exist, or as if it's simply some kind of obstacle that some other representatives of the UN want to enforce on us. Other countries will not obey international law and reduce their weapons and so on until we do. We must go first because we are by far the most violent country on earth. We have 50% of the world's military budget ourselves, and we have about that much of the world's nuclear stockpile and stockpile of weapons and so on. The rest of the world is terrified of us, quite justifiably, and they are merely trying to defend themselves against us. And so we have no business interfering with the development of Venezuela.
And the relationship, just for clarification, in the relationship between Russia and Venezuela.
We should not interfere. It's none of our business.
Awesome. Thank you.
If we want to trade with Venezuela, fine. The Russians want to trade with Venezuela, fine.
Great. Mr. Carrano?
Initially, I disagree with the nature of the question. You proffered it as if we do ourselves not only have an imperative to go ahead and to respond to Venezuela, but as if it was actually legal for us to go ahead and respond to Venezuela. In that sense, the question is completely invalid. The Constitution mandates that we abide by a policy of complete and total neutrality. That means not entangling alliances. That means not becoming involved in the extranational affairs of other nations. Trade with nations, be friends with nations, but don't become involved with none. In the same sense, according to the philosophy of patriots such as Ron Paul, Barry Goldwater, what we have is that whenever we get involved in these plexiform extranational issues, we generate something called blowback, which is an unforeseen repercussion. To those that are familiar with chaos theory, an adequate definition of it being sensitive dependence on initial conditions, in which slight variations of input can manifest and precipitate over time to have unforeseen consequences. Projecting a hostile foreign policy invites chaos, not only at home, but in overseas and abroad. I disagree that we should be becoming involved with any other nation's personal sovereignty. And unlike my fellow Green Party candidate here, Richard Duffee, he wishes to forfeit national sovereignty to a power which is not recognized by the Constitution. We're a free nation. And above all things, the free nation is governed by a society which can only inherit rights which have been delegated to them by the autonomy of the people. We ourselves delegated our autonomy to be represented to our representatives in Washington. We, on the other hand, did not delegate our autonomy in our status to represent ourselves to the delegates in Washington for the purposes of being sold out to extranational powers and being manipulated like chess pieces and pawns in a global game of world domination.
Mr. Duffee, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, the Constitution does not say that we should not have any relationships with other governments. What it says in Article 6 is that we are supposed to obey international law, that international law is part of the supreme law of the land. That's what I'm asserting. Not that we should be subordinate to some international organization, but that we should respect what our Constitution says, namely that that international law is part of the supreme law of the land. And we had a great deal of a role in creating that also. And so it's not that we're free to have relationships with other countries. It was George Washington in his speeches who said that we should have no entangling alliances. That phrase does not occur in the Constitution anywhere. We can have alliances, they're just rather stupid ideas.